Today is April the 13th. It's a Wednesday. It is 9:22 at night. I'm sitting in the dining room and I am listening to music. Got out my diary. I've been writing in my diary today. I've been writing in my diary almost all my conscious life. I'm on page 314. I got back out because I was reading earlier today. I was looking at this book I got in the thrift store today, Transcendentalism in New England, A History by Octavius Brooks Frothingham. This book was first published in 1876. So he mentions in the introduction by Sidney E. Armstrong, who's a very famous American historian, he mentions this book, which I have in my library. It's The Transcendentalist, an anthology edited by Perry Miller. And I got that out. Like I said, I have a huge collection on American Transcendentalism. So I got this out. It's an anthology edited by Perry Miller. Perry Miller, he wrote a biography on Jonathan Edwards, and he's written a lot of books. Of course, he's no longer living. Yeah, he wrote The New England Mind, 17th century, The New England Mind from Colony to Providence, Aaron into the Wilderness. Very famous American historian. So I was reading that earlier this evening, and I was reading Iris Murdoch, Alive Today, and I looked at this morning Paris Vagabond by John Paul Sartre. I forgot to mention in my video today that this book I got from the library used bookstore. I mentioned Denis Johnson. This is the book I got last Saturday when I volunteered, The Train Dreams by Denis Johnson. It says here, Denis Johnson's Train Dream is an epic in miniature, one of the most evocative and potent fictions. Robert Grainer is a day laborer in the American West at the start of the 20th century, an ordinary man in extraordinary times. Buffeted by the loss of his family, Grainer struggles to make sense of this strange new world. As the story unfolds, we witness both his shocking personal defeats and the radical changes that transform America in his lifetime. Suffused with the history and landscapes of the West, its otherworldly flora and is Rugged Loggerers and Bridge Builders, the new novella by the National Book Award-winning author of The Tree of Smoke, captures the disappearance of distinctly American way of life. As I mentioned, I have a large Denis Johnson collection. I've shown this. He won the National Book Award for The Tree of Smoke by Denis Johnson. This came out in, I think, 2007. He's most famous for, Denis Johnson, for his stories, Jesus' Son. I got into Denis Johnson when I read his novel Already Dead, A California Gothic by Denis Johnson. And when I read this, I started collecting his writings. He wrote this book, Angels by Denis Johnson. He wrote this book of poetry, The Throne of the Third Heaven of the Nations Millennium General Assembly. Poems collected anew by Denis Johnson. He wrote this book, Seek Reports from the Edges of America and Beyond by Denis Johnson. He wrote this book, Frisk Adora by Denis Johnson. The Stars at Noon by Denis Johnson. All these books here. Oh yeah, he wrote The Veil by Denis Johnson, and he wrote Resuscitation, a Hangman, a novel by Denis Johnson. A couple of years ago, when I was volunteering at the Book Nook, all these were on the shelf. Somebody got rid of all their Denis Johnson, and I was able to buy them for my library, for our library. As I mentioned, this book, Nobody Move, a novel by Denis Johnson. I have this on CD. So yeah, so that's what I got. That's my Denis Johnson collection. And so I was really pleased to get Denis Johnson when I didn't have in my collection of Denis Johnson's collection of his works. I didn't mention that Saturday I also picked up this novel, The Red House by Mark Haddon. I have his other books, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. And I have his book, A Spot of Bother, a novel by Mark Haddon. I also didn't mention this book, The Abseline by Jean Christopher Ruffin, a novel. I've mentioned that I have his novel, The Brasilia Red. So these are the things I forgot to mention in my last video. Books I've been adding to our library. So yeah, I wanted to mention that, and because what I do is I start collecting a writer. Like I said, I started out with I'm Already Dead, a California Gothic by Denis Johnson, and then I got Jesus' Son, and then I found these books at the Book Nook, and then I bought one of his newer ones, and I found these at thrift stores and book sales. So it's kind of like my hobby. I get a hold of an author or a subject, and when I go to thrift stores, the hunt is on. I'm trying to find books by that writer or on that subject. Like, I'm always looking for books on American Transcendentalism. So today, when I was at this thrift store, I was really pleased to find this one, which I didn't have in my American Transcendentalism collection. And so I'm always looking for novels by Iris Murdoch. So yeah. So if you have any writers that you think are really worth collecting, I like serious writers. I don't read fantasy. I don't read science fiction, crime. I kind of like certain writers. I got this Paris Vagabond because it mentions that Jack Kerouac in On the Road, and I like reading about eccentrics and bohemians and tramps and bums and lost souls. As I mentioned, for years I worked on Skid Row in Richmond, California. I worked in the Richmond Rescue Mission, and I worked at Mel Trotter's Rescue Mission in Grand Rapids before I got married, and kind of lived on the edge. I kind of lived with the outcast, and I've always been kind of attracted to bohemianism, avant-garde literature, extreme music, surrealism. I'm always kind of like suppose I'm a little bit of a nonconformist, even though I'm an evangelical Christian. I don't really fit anywhere in our society or our culture. I don't fit in the American evangelical landscape either. But what you got to do is you got to be true to God's calling and to where He's placed you in life. So yeah, so I'm sitting here writing in my diary, listening to some black metal, and tomorrow is a Thursday. So I just wanted to make this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.